Did you know that Marvel movies are inspired by Marvel Comics?
What the?
But did you know that there are also a number of times where the Marvel Comics have been inspired by the Marvel movies? Let's start with characters who first appeared in the movies before being introduced in a comic. Going all the way back to when the Marvel Cinematic Universe began in 2008, one of the characters introduced was Agent Phil Coulson. It's kind of interesting that out of all the named agents in the 60 plus years of Marvel Comics, they decided to introduce an original. Because of how notable Phil became in the movies, he not only got to lead a spin-off show, but he was also later added to the comics in 2011's Battle Scars. Initially identified as Cheese, his identity was officially revealed in the final part of the 6-part limited series, a comic run that also introduced another notable character from the movies. While the Ultimate Comic Universe Nick Fury was black, and even modelled off Samuel L. Jackson before he was even cast in the MCU, the Prime Universe version was white. So in the same limited series that Phil Coulson was introduced, Nick Fury Jr. also came to be. His parents, Nina Jones and Nick Fury, were CIA agents, so they hid his identity with the name Marcus Johnson, fearing he would be a target, and grew up alone with his mother, believing his father was dead, until he learned of this from Nick Fury Sr. in Battle Scars. Now you may be wondering how he also got an eye patch. Well, Orion didn't see the resemblance to his dad, so one of his goons took care of that. Nick Fury Jr. has taken over as the main Nick Fury of this universe, with his dad becoming the Unseen, living on the moon. If you want to know more about that, then read 2014's Original Sin. In the 6th episode of the 2nd season of Marvel's What If, Kahori was introduced. The following year, she made her way into the comics with Kahori, Reshaper of Worlds, issue 1. Hopefully one day we'll get to see the character in live action. May Kalamaway plays Layla El-Fowli in 2022's Moon Knight. But did you know she wasn't introduced into the comics until 2023's Moon Knight issue 25? It was revealed that Louise was once Scott Lang's cellmate in the Ant-Man movie from 2015. Then it was revealed that he was also his cellmate in the comics a couple of months later. Two characters seen in the 2011 Thor movie eventually made their way to the Prime Marvel comic universe. Scientist Eric Selvig first appeared in 2016's Avengers Standoff Welcome to Pleasant Hill issue 1, and Darcy Lewis showed up more recently in 2023's Scarlet Witch issue 1. While she's an astrophysicist in the MCU, her profession in the comics is investigative journalism. It was never revealed that Hank Pym had a daughter in the comics until the year after the Ant-Man movie was released. While she isn't named Hope Van Dyne, she is Nadia Van Dyne, and Nadia means hope in Russian. In the MCU, her biological mother is Janet Van Dyne, as opposed to Maria Pym in the comics. However, Janet is her adoptive mum. Jarvis in the comics is a physical person and butler to the Avengers and Tony Stark, and while we have seen a person version of this in the MCU, he was first introduced as just another rather very intelligent system in 2008's Iron Man. This artificial intelligence was later added to the comics in Invincible Iron Man issue 11, released in 2009. However, this system wasn't for Stark, it was for the very Marvel named Pepper Potts Rescue Armor. Brunhild was the main Valkyrie in the comics before Thor Ragnarok was released in 2017, a movie that featured a Valkyrie played by the very Marvel named Tessa Thompson. In 2021's King in Black, Return of the Valkyries, Marvel introduced a Valkyrie named Runa, who has a physical appearance more closely resembling Tessa, who is now the main Valkyrie within the Prime comic universe. There were lots of Loki variants in the first season of Loki, many of whom had already appeared in the comics before, like presidential candidate Loki, but one who first appeared on screen was Alligator Loki, before making his way to Page the following year. Because of the Shang-Chi movie, we now know who his mother is in the comics. Originally believed to be dead, they added the movie's Jiang to the books to retcon this. Raza was one of the first antagonists shown in the MCU, but he never appeared in the comics until Invincible Iron Man Annual Number 1, released 2 years after the Iron Man movie. While the film depicted him as the leader of the Ten Rings, the comics had him only working for the organization. The Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. show got 7 seasons, so it was only fair to add original characters like the very Marvel named Melinda May, Fitz, and Simmons to the comics, all of whom first appeared in the same book, S.H.I.E.L.D. issue 1 from 2014. A version of Yondu has existed in the comics since 1968, even being a member of the original Guardians of the Galaxy team, but they've since introduced a more movie-accurate version and killed off the original. The writer of the comics stated that this is an extremely distant relative of the original.
I'm Mary Poppins, y'all!
Now those are characters who first appeared in films and later in the comics, but there are also some major characters who are completely original that don't exist in the comics at all. Michelle Jones Watson is the MCU's equivalent of Mary Jane Watson. While Louise was added to the comics, the other members of the X-Cons, Kurt and Dave, haven't yet had such luck. While Ghost is a villain in the comics, it isn't Ava Starr, who's an original character. This is the same situation for Antonio Dreykov's Taskmaster and Carly Morgenthau's Flag Smasher. Cassie Lang's mother is Maggie in the movies, Peggy Ray in the comics, same with her stepfather being the very Marvel named Blake Burdick in the books, and the not very Marvel named Paxton in the MCU. Shang-Chi's sister Xialing is Zhen Bao in the comics, and his father is also different. On screen, he's both Wenwu and the Mandarin, while in the comics, Wenwu doesn't exist and the Mandarin is not Shang-Chi's father. Continuing on with Shang-Chi, both Katie Chen and Travis Slattery are movie exclusives. Talia and Dag are only seen in the Marvels. Over in the Venomverse, Dr. Dan Lewis, Dr. Dora Skirith, and Mrs. Chen do not exist outside the films. I'm surprised they haven't added Dopinder to the comics yet. On top of that, there are probably a whole bunch more minor characters who are created exclusively for the movies and shows.
I want to fill my soul. I want to belong to something like you, Pool Sir.
Now let's talk about how the comics have updated character personalities to more align with the movies. Peter Quill was initially a more no-nonsense character in the comics, which was later updated to a more witty persona because of Chris Pratt's portrayal in the Guardians of the Galaxy movie. Tony Stark is another character who was initially more serious in the comics, but Robert Downey Jr. essentially introduced the character to so many people that they decided to give him more of that wit and charm in the comics as to not confuse people who started reading the books because of the movies. The Red Guardian was an enemy in the comics until the Black Widow movie, where they made the character more heroic, a characteristic they decided to fold into the comics since the release of the film. Negasonic Teenage Warhead initially looked like this in the comics with the power of telepathy. However, after the success of the Deadpool movie, they added the film's power and updated her physical appearance in the books. I mentioned this in other videos, but in 2016, James Gunn had written Ego the Living Planet into Guardians of the Galaxy Volleyball 2, but Disney didn't own the character. Instead, he was with 20th Century Fox because of his connection with Galactus, who's connected to the Fantastic Four. So the two studios made a deal where Marvel would get Ego if Fox could change the powers of Negasonic Teenage Warhead in the Deadpool movie. I'm assuming they just wanted to use the character because of the name.
Negasonic Teenage. What the
It's not uncommon for comics to give characters more updated designs to more closely align with the movies and shows, but one of the most notable is Agatha. Usually known for being elderly, was given a more youthful look after Kathryn Hahn portrayed the character in the MCU. Michael B. Jordan was so good as Eric Killmonger in Black Panther that Marvel decided to give the character his own limited series comic with a design that looks extremely similar to what's seen on screen. Baby Groot sold Marvel a lot of toys after appearing in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, so they hoped he would do the same in the comics by writing a story arc that would allow Baby Groot to appear.
I am Groot.
Wanda and Pietro Maximoff were originally considered mutants and children of Magneto in the comics. However, because of the split ownership of the characters in the movie universe between Disney and 20th Century Fox, and Marvel Studios not allowed to refer to the characters as mutants, they decided to change the comics so that they were genetically modified by the High Evolutionary disguised as mutants. Around the same time, during the Axis event, where Red Skull harnessed Professor X's powers, Doctor Doom and Wanda performed a spell to stop him, but it ended up turning heroes into villains and vice versa. Under the influence of this spell, Wanda intended to kill Doom, but Magneto and Quicksilver tried to stop her, only for Wanda to use a spell that affects those related to her by blood, except the curse only worked on Pietro, not Magneto, retconning that he was their father. This wasn't the only time the comics did something like this. As Disney had control over the books, they decided to push their characters' stories over the ones licensed out to 20th Century Fox. So the Fantastic Four run ended, only seeing these characters pop up every so often in other characters' comics, and the Inhumans were prioritized over the X-Men. However, now that these characters are all back with Marvel Studios, X-Men are back on top, and Fantastic Four have a series again on Page.
Say that again?
Kamala Khan was an Inhuman in the comics, but is a mutant in the MCU. Now, you would think that this is something that couldn't be changed in the comics, seeing as though we literally saw Kamala being exposed to the Terrigen Mist, which brings out the ability of those with Inhuman bloodline, doesn't affect those without the gene, but kills mutants when mixed with the atmosphere. So the comics couldn't just say that she was a mutant all along. Plus, she was wrapped in a cocoon. So instead, they killed off the character, brought her back pretty much straight away, but as a rare mutant-Inhuman hybrid.
Kamala, there's something different in your genes.
I don't think it's any coincidence that we got a Civil War 2 around the same time as Captain America Civil War, or another Infinity Wars comic the same year as the Avengers Infinity War movie. This happens a lot, often highlighting characters or stories as a way to cross-promote between the two mediums. They even brought back Old Man Logan to be the Prime Universe version of Logan's Wolverine to coincide with the release of the movie. Adding on to this, characters who are often seen as more minor/background characters have gotten more play in the books if they played a role with a more vocal role in the movies, like Agent Carter, Jimmy Woo, or Agatha Harkness. The comics have even been known to update team rosters to align more with what's seen on screen. The comics were probably best known for the Defenders being Hulk, Namor, Doctor Strange, and Silver Surfer, but to coincide with the release of the show, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist took on the team's name. Daredevil and Jessica Jones had never even been members of this team in the comics until this run from 2017. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man reverted away from mechanical web shooters, instead making them organic. A couple of years later, there was a storyline in the comics where Peter Parker's Spider-Man had this organic feature. In short, he was basically transformed into a giant spider and upon re-emerging as a person, could shoot webs from his wrists. However, this only lasted a couple of years until it was reversed during the notable One More Day story arc. Something I've always found fascinating was that not one of the Infinity Stones was the same color in the movies as they were in the comics. That's pretty impressive. However, the gems have since had a makeover in the books to now all be the exact same color from page to screen. In the comics, the 10 rings were actually rings, but the Shang-Chi movie made them bracelets before the comics added this design. However, having said this, they didn't replace the rings. They still exist. You know how the X-Men were known for having colourful costumes in the comics and animated show? Well, when the first live-action movie decided to do black leather suits, the comics quickly followed suit. But this didn't last long, and the vibrant tones eventually returned.
What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
While the design of Elektra on The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was inspired by the Ultimate Universe, Marvel Prime later decided to use more blue. However, in the years since, has reverted back to green and yellow. In Iron Man 3, Rhodey is the Iron Patriot, but his first comic appearance in that suit wasn't until after the movie was released. The suit existed in the comics, but it was most notably worn by Norman Osborn.
It tested well with focus groups, alright?
Just remember, things change all the time in the comics. Personalities change, costumes change, appearances change, origins change. So the books being inspired by the movies isn't really going off-brand to what Marvel has always done. Things have always been changed and retconned in the comics. It's not just the movies that have done this. In 2019, Kevin Feige became Chief Creative Officer of Marvel Entertainment, overseeing creative decisions across all mediums from movies, TV, comics, and more. When X-Men senior writer Jordan D. White was asked how this affected Marvel Comics, he explained that Kevin told them to just keep doing what they were doing and stay 5 to 10 years ahead of the movies so they can have interesting stories that could potentially be adapted on screen. So there doesn't seem like there's any pressure to change anything in the books just because it happened on screen, at least not since Feige's been given control.
Say that again?
Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments which addition or change to the comics you like the most. And don't forget to absolutely obliterate that like, subscribe, and share button. I'm just kidding. Only do it with enough force that it registers. I don't want any of you breaking whatever device you're watching this on.